My husband thinks he owns the air I breathe. For 10 years, I let him believe I was a penniless trophy wife while he controlled every cent. But this morning, I bought his bank, his building, and his debt. He's about to find out that the woman he treats like a pet actually has a $15 billion secret. And his lease on my life, it just expired.
The condensation on the floor-to-ceiling windows of their 64th floor penthouse blurred the glittering lights of the city below, turning the world into a smear of cold neon jewelry. Inside, the atmosphere was just as curated. Everything in the room, from the minimalist Italian sofa to the $20,000 centerpiece of white orchids, screamed of Mark's meticulously managed success. Mark sat at the head of the table, the sharp lines of his designer suit mirroring the rigid precision of his personality. He didn't look at Sarah. He looked at the spreadsheet projected onto the wall from his laptop. "I've noticed an uptick in your discretionary spending, Sarah," he said, his voice smooth like a blade wrapped in silk. He took a slow, deliberate sip of a vintage Bordeaux that cost more than most people's monthly rent. "A gallery donation? A charity gala? We talked about this. My capital is tied up in the merger. You need to consult me before you commit my name and my money to these vanity projects." Sarah sat across from him, her posture perfect, her expression a mask of practiced docility. To anyone else, she looked like the ultimate trophy, beautiful, silent, and expensive. But beneath the table, her thumb traced the edge of a small encrypted key fob in her pocket. "It was for the children's hospital, Mark," she said softly. "I thought—" "That's the problem. You thought," he interrupted, finally meeting her eyes with a look of patronizing pity. "I provide the life, Sarah. You provide the company. That's the contract. Without my signature, this entire lifestyle vanishes like smoke. Don't forget who owns the roof over your head." He smiled then, a thin, triumphant curve of the lips. He truly believed she was a bird in a cage of his making, unaware that she had already bought the sky. Now, Pulse, go back and click the like and subscribe button now so you won't miss the next story.
The silence that followed Mark's declaration was heavy, filled only by the low hum of the penthouse's climate control. To Mark, the silence signaled submission. To Sarah, it was the quiet before a tectonic shift. For 3 years, Mark had operated under the delusion that his boutique investment firm, Vanguard Wealth, was the apex of the city's financial food chain. He strutted through the apartment like a conqueror, oblivious to the fact that the very ground he stood on was shifting. "I have a meeting at the club tomorrow with the Sterling Group," Mark said, breaking the quiet as he scrolled through his phone. "Wear the emerald silk. I need you looking like $1 billion, even if you don't have a cent of your own." Sarah's eyes remained fixed on her wine glass. "The Sterling Group? I heard they were pulling back on their urban developments." Mark snorted, a sharp, ugly sound. "Where did you hear that? Between hair appointments? Stick to the guest list, Sarah. I handle the macroeconomics. They're signing the bridge loan on Monday. It'll solidify my position as the primary stakeholder in the waterfront project. Once that's done, I might even increase your monthly stipend. Maybe you can finally buy that summer house you keep hinting at. In my name, of course." Sarah felt a cold spark of amusement. She knew exactly why the Sterling Group was pulling back. She had instructed her trustees to outbid them on the waterfront land 3 weeks ago, using a blind shell company that Mark couldn't trace if his life depended on it. "I just want us to be secure, Mark," she said, her voice a masterclass in feigned anxiety. "What if the market turns? What if Vanguard isn't as untouchable as you think?" Mark stood up, his chair scraping harshly against the marble floor. He walked over to the window, looking out at the city as if he were staring at a game board he had already won. "Vanguard is me, and I am the market. I've leveraged everything into this merger. It's a closed loop, Sarah. No one can touch me." He didn't see the way Sarah's hand tightened around the key fob in her pocket. He didn't see the notification that flashed momentarily on her smartwatch, a confirmation from her legal team that the acquisition of distressed assets was complete. "You've leveraged everything?" she asked, her voice tilting upward. "Everything," he confirmed, pride swelling his chest. "That's how real power works. You bet it all to win it all. But you wouldn't understand the pressure of having the world on your shoulders." "I suppose I'm just lucky to have someone so substantial looking after me." As she walked toward the kitchen, she passed the hallway mirror. For a split second, the mask of the submissive wife dropped. In its place was a woman who had spent a decade playing a long game that was finally reaching its endgame. Mark thought he was the architect of their lives, but he was merely a tenant in a structure Sarah had already bought and paid for. The cracks weren't just in his empire, they were in the very foundation of his reality. And tomorrow, the first piece of plaster would fall.
The morning air in the executive suite of Vanguard Wealth smelled of expensive espresso and the metallic tang of ambition. Mark adjusted his silk tie in the reflection of the glass-walled conference room, his heart beating with the rhythmic certainty of a man about to become a legend. Today was the day the Sterling merger would close. Today he would move from being a player to being the house. Across the table sat the Sterling representatives, 3 men in gray suits who looked as though they had been carved from the very granite of the financial district. They weren't smiling. "The contracts are ready for signature, Mark," the lead partner, Elias Sterling, said flatly. "But there's a small discrepancy in the collateral disclosure, a minor glitch in the matrix, if you will." Mark chuckled, a sound of practiced ease. "Elias, we've been over this. My personal holdings, the penthouse, and the subsidiary equity in the waterfront development are all accounted for. The leverage is solid. I've put everything on the line because I know the line holds." "That's the thing," Elias said, sliding a manila folder across the polished mahogany. "The line didn't just move, it vanished." Mark opened the folder. His eyes scanned the documents, his brain initially refusing to process the words. Foreclosure notice, acquisition of debt, assignment of leases. "What is this?" Mark's voice cracked, the silk stripping away to reveal the raw panic beneath. "This says my primary creditors sold my debt to a private equity firm called Aegis Holdings at midnight. And Aegis, they've called in the notes immediately." "They didn't just call in the notes, Mark," Elias replied, standing up and closing his briefcase with a sharp click. "They bought the waterfront land you were planning to develop. They outbid us by $300 million, cash, no financing, no leverage, just liquid power." "That's impossible!" Mark slammed his fist on the table, the vibrations rattling the water carafes. "No one has that kind of liquidity without a public filing. Who is Aegis? Who is the principal?" "We don't know," Elias said, walking toward the door. "But they own your debt, they own your office lease, and according to this morning's filing, they now own 60% of Vanguard's outstanding shares. You're not the CEO anymore, Mark. You're a minority stakeholder in a company that doesn't belong to you." The room went cold. Mark felt the walls, the literal glass walls he had used to overlook his kingdom, closing in. His phone buzzed on the table, a text from his property manager. "Mr. Sterling, we have been instructed by the new building owners to begin the inventory process of the penthouse. Please ensure all personal effects are removed by 6 p.m. A courier is delivering the formal eviction notice to your office now." Mark sank into his ergonomic chair, the leather squeaking under his weight. His mind raced, looking for a lifeline. Sarah. He needed to call Sarah. He'd have to move her to a hotel, explain that there was a temporary liquidity crunch, keep the mask on just a little longer. She was his only constant, the one person who didn't understand enough about the world to realize he was drowning. He dialed her number, his hands shaking so violently he nearly dropped the phone. "Sarah? Sarah? Listen to me." he gasped when she picked up. "There's been a complication at the firm. Nothing serious, just some paperwork issues. I need you to pack a bag. We're going to stay at the St. Regis for a few days while I clear this up." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Sarah spoke, her voice wasn't the soft, hesitant whisper he was used to. It was resonant, clear, and terrifyingly calm. "I'm already at the St. Regis, Mark. I checked into the Royal Suite an hour ago, but I only booked it for one." "What are you talking about? Sarah, this isn't the time for—" "I saw the news, Mark. Aegis Holdings is quite efficient, aren't they?" Mark froze. A cold dread, heavier than any debt, settled in his stomach. "How do you know about Aegis?" "Because," Sarah said, and he could almost hear the smile in her voice, "I've always liked the name. It means protection. And after 10 years of your protection, I thought it was time I provided some of my own." The line went dead. The elevator ride to the 64th floor usually felt like an ascent to Olympus. Today, it felt like a descent into a tomb. Mark stood pressed against the mirrored back of the cab, staring at his own reflection. His eyes were bloodshot. His hair, usually lacquered into a perfect wave, was beginning to fray at the temples. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost, and in a way he had. He had seen the ghost of his own power. When the doors slid open, the silence of the penthouse was deafening. There was no smell of the lavender candles Sarah usually lit, no soft jazz playing from the integrated sound system. Instead, the air was stagnant, smelling of cold marble and expensive dust. "Sarah?" he called out, his voice cracking. He expected, hoped that her phone call had been some bizarre, stress-induced hallucination. He expected to find her in the kitchen, perhaps a little shaken, waiting for him to explain how he would fix everything. Instead, he found 2 men in dark suits standing in the center of the living room. They were holding digital tablets, systematically scanning the artwork on the walls. "Who the hell are you?" Mark roared, the last embers of his ego flaring up. "Get out of my house!" One of the men looked up, unimpressed. "Mr. Sterling, we're with the Asset Management Division of Aegis Holdings. We're conducting a mandatory inventory of the premises per the transfer of title. We've been instructed to allow you 30 minutes to collect your personal effects, clothing, toiletries, and any premarital property only." "This is my furniture. That's a Rothko. I paid $4 million for that." "Actually, sir," the man said, tapping his screen, "that painting was purchased by the Wayland Arras Trust 6 years ago. You merely signed the delivery receipt. The funds originated from an offshore account that, well, it wasn't yours." Mark's knees buckled. He sank onto the edge of the sofa, his sofa, only to have the second man clear his throat. "Careful with the upholstery, sir. It's part of the inventory." He stumbled past them, heading for the master bedroom. He needed to find his safe. He had a reserve of cash, some watches, and the emergency passports. But when he burst into the walk-in closet, he stopped dead. Sarah's side of the closet was empty. Not hastily packed empty, but surgically extracted. Every dress, every shoe, every scent of her was gone. On the vanity sat a single cream-colored envelope. He tore it open. Inside wasn't a letter, but a legal summary of a trust fund, the Wayland Arras inheritance. He saw the numbers first. The zeros seemed to stretch on forever, a digital horizon he couldn't grasp. Principal balance, $15 billion. Beneath the balance was a list of acquisitions made by the trust over the last 48 hours. Vanguard Wealth Management, 60% equity. The Belvedere High-Rise, full title. The Sturming Waterfront Project, land rights. At the very bottom, in Sarah's elegant, looped handwriting, was a short note. "Dear Mark, you always said that money is the ultimate measure of a person's worth. For 10 years, I let you believe I was worth nothing so that I could see exactly what you were worth. It turns out you're just a series of bad loans and a very loud suit. Don't bother with the safe.
I changed the biometric codes months ago. I've left you your wedding ring. It was the only thing you actually paid for, though technically you put it on a credit card I just paid off." The realization hit him like a physical blow. She hadn't just left him, she had erased him. He had spent a decade thinking he was the lion tamer, never realizing he was the one in the cage, being fed only what she allowed. "Time's up, Mr. Sterling," a voice called from the hallway. Mark looked down at his gold watch, the one he'd bragged about at dinner. He realized with a jolt of horror that he didn't even know if it was real, or if Sarah had replaced it with a replica while he slept, just to see if he'd noticed the difference.
The lobby of the St. Regis was a cathedral of hushed opulence, all gold leaf and the scent of expensive lilies. Mark stormed through the revolving doors, his suit jacket wrinkled and his tie loosened like a noose. He looked entirely out of place, a frantic, sweating ghost in a world of cool, calm composure. "I need to see my wife," he barked at the concierge, slamming his hand onto the marble counter. "Sarah Sterling, room whatever the royal suite is." The concierge didn't blink. He looked at Mark with the detached professional pity one might afford a dying bird. "Mr. Sterling, I'm afraid Mrs. Wayland Arras is not accepting visitors at this time." Wayland Arras. The name hit Mark like a physical punch to the gut. She had already dropped his name. She had shed Sterling like a cheap coat that no longer fit. "I'm her husband," he hissed, leaning in. "I don't care what she's calling herself. Give me the key, or I'll make a scene that will ruin your afternoon." "Sir," a voice spoke from behind him. Mark turned to find two security guards, their presence as solid and immovable as the building's foundation. "The lady has requested that if you arrived, you be escorted to the conservatory. She's waiting for you there. Please, don't make us use the scene you're so fond of." Mark followed them, his heart hammering against his ribs. He rehearsed his speech as they walked. "I'm sorry. We can fix this. Think of the years we spent together. Think of the life we built." He convinced himself that if he could just get her in a room, if he could use that old charm, he could reclaim the $15 billion and the woman attached to it. The conservatory was a lush glass-enclosed garden overlooking the city. Sarah was sitting at a small wrought-iron table, a tea service for one laid out before her. She looked radiant. Gone was the muted, neutral-toned wardrobe Mark had insisted on. She wore a sharp midnight blue silk suit that looked like it cost more than his car. "You look like you've had a long day, Mark," she said, not looking up from her teacup. "Sit, you're making the air feel frantic." Mark pulled out a chair, his bravado failing him the moment he saw her eyes. They weren't angry. They were worse. They were indifferent. "Sarah, what is this?" he whispered, his voice trembling. $15 billion? Why didn't you tell me? We could have been the most powerful couple in the country. I could have doubled that for you in 3 years. Sarah finally looked at him, and for the first time, Mark saw the woman behind the mask. She looked ancient and brilliant, like a diamond forged under impossible pressure. "That's exactly why I didn't tell you. You would have managed it. You would have folded my legacy into your ego until there was nothing left of me. I spent 10 years watching you treat people like assets and assets like toys. I didn't want to be a toy, Mark, and I certainly didn't want my grandfather's life's work to become fuel for your vanity." 10 years? Mark breathed. "You lied to me for 10 years? Every night? Every dinner?" "I lived a role you wrote for me," she corrected him. "You wanted a quiet, dependent wife who needed your permission to exist. I gave you exactly what you asked for. It's not my fault you didn't look closer at the person sharing your bed." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a cold, razor-sharp edge. "You thought you were the predator, Mark, but the thing about being at the top of the food chain is that you stop looking for the things that are bigger than you. You were so busy watching my allowance that you didn't notice I was buying the bank." "I have rights," Mark stammered,
his mind grasping at legal straws. Spousal support, half of the assets. Sarah let out a soft, genuine laugh that chilled him to the bone. Mark, look at the papers I left you. The Wayland Arras Trust is ironclad, established decades before we met. And as for spousal support, you signed a very detailed prenuptial agreement, remember? The one you insisted on because you didn't want me coming for your firm if we ever split? Mark felt the blood drain from his face. He remembered the document. He had been so smug when he handed it to her, thinking he was protecting his petty millions from a cheap girl. I've already filed for divorce, Sarah said, standing up, and since you have no income, no assets, and a massive amount of personal debt that Aegis Holdings is currently processing, I've decided to be generous. She reached into her bag and slid a single bill across the table, a $20 bill. Get a cab, Mark. I've already had your things sent to your mother's house in Jersey.
Now pulse. Go back and click the like and subscribe button now so you won't miss the next story.
The $20 bill sat on the table like a taunt. Mark didn't touch it. Instead, he watched Sarah walk away, her silhouette framed by the glass of the conservatory, a queen reclaiming a kingdom he never knew existed. As the doors hissed shut behind her, the desperation in Mark's chest curdled into a cold, jagged rage. He wasn't a man who accepted defeat. He was a man who redirected it. If he couldn't have the throne, he would burn the palace down with her inside it. He stumbled out of the St. Regis, his mind racing through the dark architecture of his professional life. He knew things. He knew where the bodies were buried in the city's financial district. More importantly, he knew the gray areas of the Wayland Arras Trust's recent acquisitions. No one moves $15 billion without tripping a few alarms, and Mark was certain that in her haste to dismantle him, Sarah had left a trail of regulatory breadcrumbs. By midnight, Mark was hunkered down in a dimly lit 24-hour diner in a part of town he usually only drove through. His laptop, the one piece of property the Aegis movers had overlooked in his briefcase, glowed with the feverish intensity of his search. You want to play Aegis, Sarah? Let's see how the SEC feels about a private trust shadow buying a public interest waterfront project without a cooling-off period. He began drafting an anonymous whistleblower report. He detailed the insider trading he suspected, the market manipulation of Vanguard stock, and the hostile takeover tactics that had wiped him out. He wasn't just aiming for a lawsuit. He was aiming for a federal freeze on all her assets. If he could lock up her billions in a 5-year litigation battle, she'd be just as trapped as he was. He hit send on an encrypted email to a contact he had at the Financial Times. The Wayland Arras scandal, the secret billionaire destroying the market. Then he made one more call. Marcus, it's Mark Sterling. Yeah, I know what the tickers say. Listen to me. I have the keys to the kingdom. I know how to break the Aegis shell. I need a bridge loan and a legal team that doesn't mind getting their hands bloody. We're going to file an injunction against the Wayland Arras estate by morning. There was a long silence on the other end. Mark, Marcus finally said, his voice sounding distant and strained. Have you checked the news in the last 20 minutes? I don't care about the news. I care about the injunction. The SEC didn't wait for your tip, Mark. They just released a statement. They've been working with Aegis Holdings for 6 months. It turns out the distressed assets Sarah bought weren't just random companies. They were the firms involved in that offshore money laundering ring the feds have been chasing since '24. Mark's heart stopped. She didn't just buy your debt, Mark, Marcus continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. She turned over your internal ledgers to the Department of Justice. The vanity projects you mocked, they were her way of tracking where your firm was hiding the Sterling Group's undeclared capital. She wasn't just hiding her money from you, she was building a case. Mark looked at the screen of his laptop. A new headline popped up on the wire. Federal agents execute search warrant at Vanguard Wealth headquarters. The diner's bell chimed as the door opened. 2 men in windbreakers with FBI stenciled in yellow across the back stepped into the fluorescent light.
They didn't look like they were looking for breakfast. Mark realized then that Sarah hadn't just broken the glass ceiling. She had turned the shards into a cage.
The dawn over the Atlantic was a bruised purple, bleeding into a soft, triumphant gold. Sarah stood on the deck of her family's estate in Montauk, a property Mark had never even known existed. Here, the air didn't taste of recycled penthouse oxygen. It tasted of salt, cold spray, and an expansive, terrifying freedom. On the teak table behind her, a single burner phone buzzed. It was a text from her lead counsel. M. Sterling processed. Bail denied due to flight risk and complexity of the Vanguard fraud case. The house is clean. Sarah didn't feel the rush of adrenaline she had expected. There was no petty glee in imagining Mark in a standard-issue jumpsuit, staring at a cinder-block wall instead of a Rothko. Instead, there was a profound, hollow stillness. She had spent 10 years playing a character, the soft-spoken shadow of a loud man, and now that the stage was burned down, she had to remember who the actress was. She walked to the edge of the railing. For a decade, she had used her wealth as a weapon, a hidden blade kept sharp for the moment of the strike. Now the war was over. The $15 billion wasn't a secret anymore. It was a responsibility. A shadow moved in the doorway of the beach house. It was Elias Sterling. He wasn't wearing his suit. In a heavy wool sweater and khakis, he looked less like a corporate shark and more like the man who had been Sarah's silent ally for the better part of a year. "The markets are going to open in an hour," Elias said, leaning against the doorframe. "Vanguard stock is in free fall. The press is calling you the ghost of Wall Street. They want to know what the new chairwoman of Aegis Holdings plans to do with the wreckage." Sarah turned, her hair whipping in the sea breeze. "The wreckage is full of pension funds and small-scale investors who did nothing wrong. We're not going to strip it for parts, Elias. We're going to restructure. We're going to turn the waterfront project into low-income housing and public parks, just like my grandfather intended before Mark tried to turn it into a private playground." Elias smiled, a rare, genuine expression. "It's a hell of a way to start a Monday. You realize you've just painted a target on your back. Every hungry fund manager in the city is going to come for you now. They think you're a lottery winner, not a strategist." "Let them come," Sarah said, her voice echoing the same ironclad certainty that had shattered Mark's world. "They'll make the same mistake he did. They'll look at me and see a woman who got lucky, rather than a woman who waited." She picked up her tablet, but instead of checking the ticker or the news, she pulled up a photo from 12 years ago. It was her and her grandfather standing on this very beach. He had told her that money was nothing more than a magnifying glass. It only made you more of what you already were. Mark had been a small man, so the money had made him a bully. Sarah had spent 10 years being small, but she had grown in the dark. "Is the car ready?" asked Elias. "Where are we going? The office? The SEC hearing?" Sarah looked out at the horizon one last time. The sun was fully up now, burning away the mist. "To the hospital," she said. "I have a donation to make, and this time I'm signing the check myself." As she walked toward the driveway, leaving the ghost of Mark Sterling and his invisible empire behind, she didn't look back. The cage was gone. The sky was hers, and for the first time in 10 years, Sarah Wayland Arris was exactly who she wanted to be.
He spent 10 years controlling her every move. Did he deserve to be left with nothing, or did Sarah go too far? Let's settle this in the comments section. Make sure you click the like and subscribe button. I love you all.